The crisp autumn air did little to cool the sudden icy shock that washed over me as I stood on the curb, my meager belongings scattered around my feet in plastic bags. The imposing facade of the apartment building, a structure I had poured my life savings and endless hours into developing over 30 years, now loomed before me like a fortress against my own flesh and blood. My daughter Sarah stood framed in the ornate doorway, her arms crossed, her expression a chilling blend of triumph and disdain. Beside her, her husband Mark offered a tight, insincere smile that did nothing to soften the blow of her words. "Honestly, Mother," Sarah began, her voice deliberately amplified to carry across the small gathering of tenants she'd clearly assembled. "It's nothing personal. It's just ... You're an extra mouth to feed, an extra drain on resources. We need to be practical now. Mark and I are taking over, you understand, don't you? An extra mouth." The phrase, so callous, so devoid of the love and sacrifice I had invested in her, struck me with more force than any physical blow. I, Theodore Vance, a man who had built this building from the ground up, who had managed its operations, nurtured its tenants, and seen it flourish, was being evicted from my own creation by my own daughter. The carefully selected furniture I had placed in the common areas, the reliable appliances I had installed, the very foundation of the comfortable life I had envisioned for my retirement, all of it now seemed to belong to them, to be used as tools against me. Arthur Jr., my son, was not present. A deliberate absence that spoke volumes about his allegiance. The wedding, which had taken place just the day before, a lavish affair I had financed to secure his future, now felt like a prologue to this nightmare, a celebration of the life he was building with the very wealth I had provided, a wealth now used to cast me out. The pale pink dress Clara had worn, the one I had helped her select and pay for, seemed to mock me from a distance, a symbol of my former inclusion and current exclusion. The irony was bitter. The day after celebrating Arthur Jr.'s new beginning, my own life was being systematically dismantled. I stood there holding a worn photograph of Arthur Jr. and myself from a happier time, the image a stark contrast to the current reality. Feeling the full weight of my displacement, significant people, Clara had called the wedding guests. Was I no longer significant? Was I merely an extra mouth? The disbelief warred with a rising tide of anger, a primal instinct for survival stirring within me. The scent of lilies from the wedding bouquet, now wilting slightly in a vase on the curb, seemed to mock the hollowness that had taken root within me. The years leading up to this moment, the foundation of my supposed security, now felt like a carefully constructed illusion. For 15 years, since Eleanor's untimely passing, my entire focus had been Arthur Jr.'s well-being and the prosperity of Vance Properties, the business we had built together. I had poured my time, my expertise, and the inheritance Eleanor had left us funds earmarked for my own retirement and comfort into Arthur Jr.'s ventures, believing I was nurturing a legacy, a secure future for us all. "Dad, this next investment is the one," he'd say, his eyes alight with a familiar, boyish conviction, and I, ever the doting father, would oblige. From the down payment on his first apartment to the capital for his burgeoning business, I had readily supplied the funds, deferring my own plans, my own modest desires for travel or relaxation. Clara's arrival into his life had been a noticeable shift. Her ambition was palpable, her desire for financial security evident in every word. Every subtle manipulation aimed at Arthur Jr.'s ear. I recalled instances where Clara had suggested I look into certain investment opportunities, often with exceptionally high returns. Promised opportunities I had later discovered were either overly risky or non-existent. I dismissed these concerns, attributing them to Clara's eagerness to integrate into the family and Arthur Jr.'s youthful optimism. I had always believed in second chances, in the inherent goodness of my son, and in the power of a stable family unit. Eleanor, my late wife, had always been the more cautious one, her gentle warnings often lost in my own optimistic nature. "Theodore," she'd say, her brow furrowed with concern. "Arthur is a good boy, but Clara, she has a way of making things seem brighter than they are. Be careful with your heart and your wallet." Her words, meant as gentle counsel, now echoed with a prophetic resonance, a lament for the years of unquestioning faith I had placed in my son and his chosen partner. I remembered filling out transfer forms, signing over funds, each act a brick in the foundation of the life I believed Arthur Jr. was building. A life I thought would one day reflect the sacrifices I had made. I had believed in the inherent goodness of my son, in the strength of our family bonds, in the security of a legacy built on years of hard work and devotion. That belief I now understood with crushing clarity was the most significant sacrifice of all, a foundation built on sand. Each dollar transferred represented not just a financial transaction, but a piece of my trust, a fragment of my hopes for his future, a belief in the inherent decency that should bind a family. The wedding, meant to be the pinnacle of this shared vision, had become its undoing. The stark reality was that my love, my financial support, my very presence in his life, had been calculated not for genuine affection, but for strategic gain. This realization was a bitter, crushing weight. The very building I had poured my life into, the apartments that housed families I had come to know and care for, now felt like instruments of my own downfall, thanks to my daughter's ruthless ambition. My attempts to rationalize Clara's words, her dismissal of me as an extra mouth, dissolved with the stark reality of my eviction. The carefully chosen words, designed to inflict maximum humiliation, struck a chord of deep betrayal. I had always been a provider, a pillar of strength for my family, and to be discarded so callously by my own daughter was a blow I hadn't anticipated. The wedding, which had been a significant financial undertaking for me, a celebration I had embraced wholeheartedly to welcome Clara into the family, now felt like a deceptive prelude to this act of dispossession. I remembered the conversations with Arthur Jr. in the months leading up to the wedding, his insistence on a lavish affair, his vague mentions of needing additional funds for unexpected wedding costs, and Clara's subtle suggestions regarding the management of my finances. She had always been adept at subtly influencing Arthur Jr., and by extension, me. Now, it seemed her influence had culminated in this ultimate act of dispossession. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. My own daughter, aided by her husband, had orchestrated this, using my paternal love and trust as leverage. The foundation of my life, built on years of hard work and sacrifice, was crumbling. I had been so focused on providing for my children, on ensuring their success, that I had neglected to secure my own future. To protect myself from the very people I had sworn to love and support, my life, which I had carefully built upon a foundation of trust and familial loyalty, was suddenly shattering around me. The comfortable retirement I had envisioned, the peaceful years ahead, evaporated like mist in the morning sun. Anger, hot and sharp, began to simmer beneath the shock and disbelief. It wasn't just about the financial loss or the loss of my home. It was about the profound betrayal, the utter lack of love and respect from my own child. My carefully constructed world, built on the assumption of unbreakable familial bonds, had been systematically dismantled by the very person I had sworn to protect and nurture. I sat on the curb, the cold pavement seeping through my thin coat, and looked at the building. My building now, a symbol of my profound loss and humiliation. The truth was undeniable. I had been a fool, blinded by paternal love, and the consequences were catastrophic. This was not just a financial loss. It was an existential one, a shattering of my reality, driven by a desperate need for answers. For a shred of explanation that could make sense of this unfathomable act, I decided to approach the building's main entrance. A place I had entered countless times as the owner, the manager, the provider. Perhaps in person, faced with the reality of my presence and the public humiliation of my eviction, they would be forced to confront me, to offer some semblance of an explanation, however hollow, however late. As I approached the entrance, a palpable tension emanated from within, the air thick with a manufactured calm that felt more ominous than outright hostility. I could see Sarah and Mark through the glass doors, their silhouettes framed by the warm interior light, a stark contrast to my desolate position on the cold, windswept street. I pressed the buzzer for the main office, the familiar chime echoing strangely in the charged atmosphere. Silence. I tried again. A firm, insistent press, then a third time. Still no answer. A sense of dread, cold and absolute, washed over me, chilling me to the bone. I then reached for my phone, dialing Sarah's mobile, the same phone that had gone straight to voicemail since yesterday morning. This time, to my immense surprise, it rang. My heart leaped with a desperate, fragile hope. A tiny spark against the encroaching darkness. "Sarah," I managed, my voice tight, cracking with a mixture of relief and apprehension. A click, and then a distorted voice, heavily accented, replied, "This number is no longer in service." The line went dead, disconnected, erased. It was a brutal, undeniable confirmation, a final chilling punctuation mark on their elaborate deception. They hadn't just kicked me out. They had erased me from their lives, from their future, from their very existence. I stood on the sidewalk, the city's relentless energy, a painful counterpoint to my internal devastation. The sounds of the city blurred around me, the distant sirens, the laughter of passersby, the ordinary bustle of life, a stark, painful contrast to the seismic shift that had occurred within me. They were gone, vanished, and with them, my daughter, my trust, and the life I had known. The wedding, I now understood with sickening clarity, had been the final curtain call on a performance of filial devotion, a meticulously planned exit strategy. The anger, which had been simmering beneath the shock and disbelief, now threatened to consume me entirely. It wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was a calculated, deliberate act of destruction, a crime perpetrated with a cold, unnerving precision. As I stood there on the sidewalk, the city's relentless energy, a painful counterpoint to my internal devastation, a profound sense of clarity, sharp and cold, began to cut through the lingering shock and despair. They had taken my home, my financial security, and my daughter's love, but they had not taken my will, nor my dignity. They had orchestrated my eviction, their ultimate act of betrayal, with a chilling precision, but in doing so, they had also inadvertently unleashed something within me. This wasn't just about reclaiming lost assets. It was about reclaiming myself. I turned away from their silent, imposing building, my steps no longer faltering but purposeful, imbued with a new, unexpected resolve. My first act of defiance wouldn't be to chase them, to beg for answers, or to plead for explanations from the void they had left behind. My first victory would be to refuse to be defined by their actions, to refuse to let their betrayal shatter the core of who I was. I walked not towards the comforting familiarity of my home, which now felt tainted and threatened, but towards the nearest bank. Then to the offices of a reputable legal firm specializing in property law and business disputes. My voice, when I spoke to the receptionist, was steady, filled with a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. "My daughter has evicted me from my own building," I stated, my gaze direct and unwavering. "She has taken everything. I need to understand my legal options and how to regain control." It was a small step, perhaps, against a tide of immense loss and overwhelming betrayal. But it was my step. It was the first assertion of my will against their calculated destruction. It was the moment I refused to be a passive victim, to be defined solely by what had been taken from me. The anger, the despair, the humiliation of being cast out by my own child, the sheer audacity of their greed, these were bitter pills. But in that moment, standing at the precipice of a new, unwelcome reality, I chose not to be broken. I chose to fight. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with the daunting prospect of legal battles and the crushing weight of emotional recovery. But in that single, defiant act, I had taken the first crucial step towards reclaiming my own agency, and by extension, my liberation. The feeling of empowerment, though fragile, was a stark contrast to the helplessness that had threatened to consume me moments before. This was not the end. It was the beginning of my fight. The sterile, impersonal environment of Mr. Davies's law office offered a stark contrast to the emotional chaos churning within me. The air was cool, smelling faintly of leather-bound books and polished wood. A world away from the ostentatious grandeur of the Crestwood Hotel ballroom or the chilling emptiness of my former home. Mr. Davies, a man whose professional demeanor was tempered by a quiet understanding of human failings, listened to my account with a focused intensity. His gaze was steady, his questions precise, cutting through the fog of my emotional distress with the cold logic of a legal investigation. "Mr. Vance, your daughter Sarah, what is her profession, and her husband Mark? What is their financial background? Any history of debt, risk-taking behavior, or unusual financial dealings leading up to the wedding or the eviction?" His inquiries were not about the emotional devastation, the shattering of paternal love, but about factual evidence, about the mechanics of the crime, about the cold, hard data that could form the basis of a case. He explained the complexities of property law, the intricacies of contesting a business decision made under duress or through manipulation, and the paramount importance of gathering every piece of documentation I possessed: the original property deeds, the business incorporation papers, any communication records, any proof of my sole ownership and management of the building. "We'll need to review the current ownership structure," he stated. His tone matter-of-fact, his eyes conveying a seasoned pragmatism. "But your claim as the original owner and developer is strong. The eviction itself, if improperly executed, could also be grounds for legal action." His counsel, though devoid of personal sympathy, was profoundly grounding. It offered a path, a structured approach to dealing with the overwhelming devastation. A way to channel my anger and despair into tangible action. He confirmed my suspicion that Sarah's actions were not driven by necessity, but by a calculated desire for control and financial gain. The efficiency of his office, the systematic way they began processing my report, the quiet determination in his eyes provided a sliver of comfort in the encroaching darkness. This was not just a personal tragedy, it was a legal battle, and in identifying it as such, a path forward, however dimly lit, began to emerge. He was my first ally, a professional force of order in the face of utter chaos. A stark reminder that justice, though often slow, was a tangible possibility. He outlined the procedures, filing an immediate injunction against further property changes, gathering evidence of Sarah and Mark's financial dealings and any co-ownership claims they might assert, and preparing for a potential legal fight to reclaim the building. He stressed the need to act quickly to prevent them from further leveraging my assets. The days that followed my initial consultation with Mr. Davies were a bleak landscape of legal paperwork and a gnawing, pervasive emptiness. The eviction had left me temporarily displaced, staying in a modest hotel room that felt impersonal and cold, a stark contrast to the warmth and familiarity of the home I had built. The silence was broken only by the phantom echo of Sarah's cruel words, an extra mouth to feed a constant, agonizing reminder of the profound betrayal. I found myself replaying the entire scenario, searching for the moments I had missed, the subtle signs of Sarah's growing ambition and her husband Mark's avarice, their insistence on a lavish wedding, their subtle financial maneuvering, their casual dismissal of my contributions. It all painted a picture I had been too blind to trusting to see. It was during one of my solitary, aimless walks through the city streets, a need to escape the sterile confines of the hotel room, that I found myself near the offices of Vance Properties, the company I had founded and poured my life into. On impulse, I entered the building not to confront, but simply to be in a space that represented my life's work. As I stood in the lobby, a sense of profound loss washed over me. The building now a symbol of my displacement. It was then that I encountered Mrs. Gable, a longtime tenant in one of my residential properties. A woman of quiet observation and unexpected warmth, who had often shared tea and conversations with Arthur Sr. and knew me well. Seeing my visible distress, she approached not with intrusive pity, but with a gentle, knowing presence. "Theodore," she began softly, her eyes reflecting a deep well of compassion that seemed to see straight through my carefully constructed facade. "I heard what happened. What a terrible thing. Arthur Sr. would be heartbroken." Her words, simple and direct, cut through the emotional haze. She didn't pry, but she listened as I hesitantly at first, then with a flood of pent-up emotion, recounted the events of the wedding, the eviction, the cold finality of Sarah's actions. She shared her own experiences, a sister who had, over years, systematically drained her parents' savings through elaborate scams, a nephew who had vanished after a series of fraudulent schemes. "You are not alone in this, Theodore," she said, her hand resting gently on mine, a simple touch that conveyed immense comfort. "It is a special kind of pain when the ones you love most become the architects of your deepest hurt. But you are strong. Arthur Sr. knew that. He saw that strength in you, even when you couldn't see it yourself." Mrs. Gable became my anchor in the storm. She invited me for tea, encouraged me to talk, and crucially, shared practical advice gleaned from her own hard-won experiences: how to navigate the complex legal landscape, how to secure my remaining assets, how to begin building a new support system. She introduced me to her circle of friends, women who had faced their own trials of betrayal, financial ruin, and profound loss, but had emerged with resilience, grace, and a shared understanding. They became my unexpected alliance, a community forged in shared experience, offering a lifeline, a reminder that I was not alone and that recovery was possible. Her practical advice about legal standing, about tenant rights, and about the possibility of challenging the transfer of ownership was invaluable. The sheer audacity of Sarah's actions, the calculated nature of her deception, had stripped away layers of paternal optimism and naive trust, leaving behind a raw, unvarnished clarity about the true state of my family relationships. I spent hours poring over my original property deeds, my business incorporation papers, and the meticulous financial records of Vance Properties, not just to gather evidence for Mr. Davies, but to truly understand the extent of what had been stolen and manipulated. The sheer volume of my contributions, the years of sacrifice represented by each renovation, each tenant acquisition, each business decision, it was staggering. It wasn't just about the monetary value of the building. It was about the misplaced trust, the emotional currency I had so freely spent, believing it was an investment in love and loyalty. I realized with a painful clarity how much of my life had been defined by my children's needs, how their aspirations had dictated my financial decisions, how my own goals and desires had been placed on indefinite hold, waiting for a future that now seemed like a cruel illusion. The building, once a symbol of my stability, my anchor in the world, now felt like a stark reminder of my vulnerability, a space that could be taken from me at any moment by the very person I had raised. Yet, as I sat in the quiet of my hotel room, surrounded by the sterile anonymity of its furnishings, a quiet determination began to take root, pushing back against the despair. I had built this business from the ground up, and I would not let it be seized through deceit. Arthur Sr.'s legacy wasn't just in the business. It was in the resilience he had instilled in me, in the unwavering belief he had in my capabilities. I started taking small, deliberate steps to reclaim my sense of self, to rebuild a life that was no longer solely defined by my children's needs or their betrayals. I visited Eleanor's grave, not in sorrow, but in quiet communion, sharing my plight, seeking her enduring wisdom and the strength she always seemed to possess. I went to the local hardware store, a place I hadn't visited in years for my own projects, and bought supplies, rediscovering the satisfaction of hands-on work, a grounding activity that connected me to the tangible reality of my labor. I started attending the bridge club meetings Mrs. Gable had recommended, forcing myself to engage, to converse, to be present in the moment, away from the suffocating shadow of my daughter's betrayal. These were not grand gestures, but small, deliberate acts of self-preservation, tentative steps towards rebuilding a life that was solely my own, a life no longer dictated by the needs or deceits of others. The isolation was still profound. The loss of my daughter's love a gaping wound that ached with a constant dull throb, but the burgeoning sense of self-reliance, the quiet strength unearthed by adversity, began to offer a fragile yet persistent glimmer of hope. Mrs. Gable, in particular, became an invaluable mentor. She shared stories of her own financial struggles after her husband's sudden death, how she had rebuilt her life through sheer determination and a strong support network. She introduced me to her circle of friends, women who had faced similar betrayals, financial ruin, and profound loss, but had emerged with resilience, grace, and a shared understanding. This new community, forged in shared experience, offered a lifeline, a reminder that I was not alone and that recovery was possible. Her practical advice about legal standing, about tenant rights, and about the possibility of challenging the transfer of ownership was invaluable. I began to focus on small, achievable goals, meticulously organizing my financial records, securing my remaining assets with new legal safeguards, and establishing new routines that prioritized my own well-being and my fight for justice. The initial shock had given way to a period of profound grief and isolation. But as I began to take these small steps, a sense of agency started to emerge. A realization that even in the face of devastating loss, I had the capacity to rebuild and to fight for what was rightfully mine. The introspection allowed me to see my past reliance not as a weakness, but as a natural consequence of love and trust, and to consciously choose a different path forward, one defined by self-respect, unwavering determination, and a righteous pursuit of justice. The legal battle ahead loomed like a dark cloud. The initial shock of betrayal giving way to a cold, hard resolve, Mr. Davies confirmed that Sarah and Mark had not only seized the building but had also begun making changes, subtly altering lease agreements and, most disturbingly, informing tenants that rent increases were imminent. My legal team's priority was to file an immediate injunction to halt any further property transactions or significant changes until the ownership dispute could be resolved. The evidence of my sole proprietorship and decades of management was substantial, but Sarah's actions suggested a deeper layer of deception, possibly involving forged documents or manipulation of Arthur Sr.'s estate filings. Detective Miller, meanwhile, was pursuing leads based on Clara's journal from the previous story, which we are now setting aside for this new narrative and my own detailed financial records, trying to trace any illicit offshore transfers or hidden assets related to Arthur Jr. and Clara's wedding scheme. Though the direct connection to Sarah and Mark's current actions was still being established, the tension mounted as Mr. Davies discovered that Sarah, using the wedding as a distraction, had likely manipulated Arthur Sr.'s final affairs during his illness to gain leverage or sole control over the property transfer, circumventing the established legal protections for spouses. This meant the fight wasn't just about financial restitution. It was about proving Sarah's fraudulent intent and nullifying her illegitimate claims. The rising tension wasn't just about the financial loss. It was about the horrifying realization that my own daughter, the child I had raised, had conspired with her husband to steal my life's work, using the very building I had poured my heart and soul into as their ultimate prize. The evidence we were gathering, Arthur Sr.'s original will, my meticulous financial records, tenant testimonies about my decades of fair management, and crucially, Clara's journal, a detail I must correct here, as the new premise does not involve Clara. Instead, the focus will be on Sarah's direct actions, and any proof of her manipulation began to paint a clear picture of premeditation and malice. We learned that Sarah had leveraged Arthur Jr.'s wedding expenses as a cover for Arthur Sr.'s financial transactions to fund their own clandestine operation, a detail that further fueled my determination to expose their scheme. The evidence was accumulating, painting a grim picture of calculated greed and familial betrayal. Armed with my original property deeds, Vance Properties incorporation papers, and a meticulously organized ledger detailing decades of my sole management and financial investment, I met with Mr. Davies to formulate our defense. He was methodical, his approach calm and reassuring, a vital counterpoint to my own emotional turmoil. "Theodore," he began, "your documentation is impeccable. It clearly establishes your ownership and management history. Our primary strategy will be to prove undue influence and potentially fraud in any documentation Sarah might try to present to counter this. We need to demonstrate that Arthur Sr. intended for you to retain control and benefit from the property, and that Sarah's actions were intended to circumvent this." He advised us to gather sworn affidavits from long-term tenants who could attest to my fair dealings and the building's consistent management under my leadership. He also suggested contacting Mr. Harrison, Arthur Sr.'s longtime business partner, whose testimony could speak to Arthur Sr.'s unwavering trust in me and his intentions for the business and the property. Mrs. Gable and her bridge club became my steadfast support system, their practical advice and emotional encouragement invaluable. They helped me navigate the initial financial shock, organizing small fundraisers for my immediate living expenses and providing a much-needed sense of community. They reminded me of my own resilience, of the strength Arthur Sr. had always seen in me, and encouraged me to focus on my fight for justice. I began attending therapy, a suggestion from Mrs. Gable, to process the complex emotions of grief, anger, and betrayal, to reframe the narrative from helpless victimhood to one of determined recovery. This preparation wasn't just for a legal battle, it was for my own psychological fortitude, a methodical process of reclaiming my narrative and rebuilding my sense of self-worth, piece by painstaking piece. The determination was clear, resonating within me like a battle cry. The war had officially begun, but I was ready to fight. Mr. Davies also initiated legal proceedings to freeze any assets Arthur Jr. or Clara might have attempted to transfer, though the recovery of the stolen funds remained a daunting challenge. The stakes were incredibly high, not just for my financial future, but for my very identity as a man who had built his life and legacy through honest work and unwavering dedication. The courtroom, a stark impersonal space, felt like a world away from the familiar warmth of Vance Properties offices or the comfort of my home. The proceedings were surreal, a legal battle against my own daughter, a woman whose existence had been intertwined with my deepest love and trust, now standing as an adversary. Sarah and Mark, shielded by their formidable legal team, led by Mr. Sterling, a man renowned for his aggressive courtroom tactics, presented a united front, their narrative meticulously crafted to portray me as an elderly, overly trusting parent, easily manipulated by my own declining years and perhaps influenced by external parties rather than the rightful owner and manager of Vance Properties. They wielded the altered documentation which presumably showed the property transfer to them as irrefutable proof of their claim. Sterling skillfully highlighted my temporary displacement and financial distress, attempting to frame it as evidence of my inability to manage affairs rather than the direct consequence of their fraud. Sarah, in her testimony, adopted the guise of a dutiful daughter who had merely stepped in to protect the family legacy from her father's perceived mismanagement and vulnerability. Her words dripped with feigned concern and a subtle accusation of my own failings. Mark corroborated her story, his testimony carefully worded to avoid any direct admission of their conspiracy. Then, it was my turn to take the stand. Facing Sarah and Mark across the courtroom, their faces impassive, their eyes devoid of any recognition of the father who had raised them, I felt a surge of unwavering resolve, a quiet strength that had been forged in the fires of betrayal. Mr. Davies guided me through my testimony, allowing me to speak directly to the court, to lay bare the truth of the past year, not with anger, but with the quiet, unwavering conviction of truth. I recounted the wedding, the eviction, the deliberate manipulation. I presented Clara's journal again, correcting myself to focus on the new premise. This would be evidence of Sarah's planning, perhaps found by Mr. Davies through investigation, detailing her intent and financial motives, potentially involving her brother. Detective Miller testified about the difficulty in tracing the funds and the evidence gathered pointing to a deliberate scheme, including the journal and the suspicious financial activities. Mr. Harrison, Arthur Sr.'s business partner, testified to Arthur Sr.'s deep trust in me and his unwavering commitment to Vance Properties, directly contradicting any implication of my mismanagement. Mrs. Gable provided a powerful character reference for me, highlighting my stability, my resilience, and my unwavering dedication to my business and my tenants, painting a picture of a capable businessman, not a vulnerable old man. My own testimony was the emotional core of the trial. I spoke of my life with Arthur Sr., of his values, his deep belief in my abilities, and the stark contrast between the man he knew and the daughter who had orchestrated this devastating betrayal. My business acumen was built over decades of honest work, I declared, my voice ringing with conviction. Arthur Sr. trusted me, and my daughter, blinded by greed, sought to steal what I had built. This claim is a lie, orchestrated by avarice and manipulation. The cross-examination by Mr. Sterling was brutal. An attempt to portray my grief as delusion, my pursuit of justice as a desperate, irrational act. But I held firm, my answers clear, my emotions raw but honest, articulating the truth of my experience without wavering. He tried to twist my efforts to protect my remaining assets and seek justice into evidence of erratic behavior. But I calmly explained the necessity of securing my future after discovering the extent of their fraud. The turning point came when Mr. Davies presented the forensic analysis of the building's ownership transfer documents, revealing subtle inconsistencies and irregularities that suggested they may have been falsified or manipulated, a detail that sent a palpable ripple of shock through the courtroom. The carefully constructed facade of Sarah and Mark's claims began to crumble, exposed by the undeniable weight of truth and the collective testimonies of those who knew my history and dedication. The judge, Justice Sterling, a woman known for her impartiality and her unwavering dedication to upholding justice, delivered her verdict after a tense period of deliberation that felt like an eternity. She acknowledged the overwhelming evidence presented, particularly the journal detailing Sarah's intentions, the testimonies of Mr. Harrison and Mrs. Gable, and the forensic analysis of the property transfer documents. She highlighted the clear pattern of exploitation and the lack of any legitimate claims Sarah or Mark had to the building based on my extensive history of ownership and management. The evidence strongly suggests a calculated scheme of financial fraud and deception, Justice Sterling stated, her voice firm and resonant. The defendant's actions appear motivated by greed rather than familial obligation or legitimate business need. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Theodore Vance. The transfer of ownership is deemed fraudulent and is hereby nullified. Full control and ownership of Vance properties, including all associated assets, are restored to Mr. Theodore Vance. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the room, a palpable release of tension. I had one. It wasn't just about regaining the building, though. That was a crucial component of justice. It was about vindication. It was about proving that truth, however buried, would ultimately prevail. Sarah and Mark, their faces ashen, were escorted from the courtroom by their calculated scheme, so meticulously planned, had unraveled. Exposed by the unwavering commitment to truth and the collective weight of evidence and testimony, justice in this instance had been served, not with vengeance but with the quiet, profound affirmation of what was right and lawful. The verdict marked the end of one harrowing chapter and the beginning of another, the chapter of my own rebuilding, and perhaps a surprising turn of events for my daughter. The days following the court's verdict were suffused with a profound sense of quiet victory and a deep, restorative relief that seeped into my very bones. The building, once the looming specter of my impending loss, the physical embodiment of my deepest betrayal, was now a sanctuary reclaimed, its familiar walls breathing with the echoes of a life truly lived, a life now secured against further predation. I walked through each floor, my fingers tracing the worn marble of the lobby, my gaze lingering on the plaques and signage that bore my name. Vance Properties, a testament to decades of hard work and integrity. The legal victory had not erased the sharp sting of betrayal, the deep wound left by my daughter's actions, but it had irrevocably shifted the ground beneath my feet, paving the way for a genuine healing, a process of rebuilding that began not with forgetting, but with integrating the painful lessons learned. I made the difficult decision to sell my personal residence, the place that held too many memories of both joy and profound sorrow. The proceeds, carefully managed with Mr. Davies' guidance, allowed me to solidify my financial independence and to make strategic, yet decisive, moves. The first was to reassert my authority over Vance Properties, not with vengeance, but with a firm hand. I called a meeting with all the tenants, my long-standing community. Standing in the now familiar lobby, I announced that as the sole and rightful owner, I would be implementing new rental agreements. The rent, I explained, would be adjusted to reflect current market rates, a significant increase, essentially tripling the previous amounts for those who had been paying under Sarah and Mark's scheme, and a substantial yet fair increase for others. This wasn't about punishment, but about restoring the financial health and integrity of the business I had built, and ensuring its stability for the future. I also made a point of purchasing a new luxury sedan, a modest indulgence that symbolized my regained autonomy, a vehicle I had deferred buying for years, and a fancy car that whispered of my regained prosperity. Sarah and Mark, I learned through the grapevine, had been forced to sell their own assets, including their flashy sports car, to cover their legal fees and the initial restitution orders. They were, by all accounts, struggling, their dreams of rapid wealth dissolving into the harsh reality of their actions. I offered them no direct contact, no further engagement. Respecting the boundaries that had been so brutally violated, my focus was on rebuilding, on reclaiming my life, not on dwelling in the ruins of their deceit. One crisp autumn afternoon, as I sat on my balcony overlooking the city skyline, a view I now appreciated with a clarity born of profound loss and hard-won victory. A profound sense of peace settled over me, deep and unwavering. The apartment was quiet, filled with the gentle hum of a life finally lived on my own terms. The sun warmed my face, and the faint scent of possibility seemed to fill the air. I had faced my deepest fears, confronted betrayal at its most devastating, and emerged not just intact, but stronger, wiser, and more fully myself than I had ever believed possible. Sarah's actions, born of greed and a profound lack of character, had inadvertently freed me from a life lived in service of her desires, allowing me to finally live a life for myself. The inheritance of lies, the foundation of my pain, had paradoxically led me to the greatest inheritance of all, the profound and unshakable truth of my own self-worth, and the unshakable freedom to live my life, finally, for myself. I had learned that love cannot be demanded or bought. It must be earned and freely given, and that true security lies not in the possessions or relationships one accumulates, but in the inner strength and resilience one cultivates. My name was not vanished from my life, nor was my building. They were mine in every sense of the word, a testament to a battle fought and won, a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit, and a promise of a future finally lived with authenticity and purpose. I had not only reclaimed my property and my finances, but I had reclaimed my spirit, my agency, and my belief in my own capacity to overcome adversity. The extra mouth they had so craftily dismissed had in fact been the source of their undoing and my rebirth. My name is Theodore Vance. I am 71 years old, and after a lifetime of building, of giving, and of profound betrayal, I have finally learned the invaluable lesson of self-preservation and the unyielding power of fighting for what is rightfully yours. The journey from being cast out by my own daughter to reclaiming my legacy and my life has been arduous, marked by deep pain, righteous anger, and a fear I once thought would consume me. But through it all, I discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. My business, Vance Properties, was not just a source of income. It was a symbol of my life's work, and I would not let it be tarnished by deceit. If my story resonated with you, if you saw a reflection of your own struggles or triumphs, or if it simply moved you, I would be deeply grateful for your support. Your engagement helps me continue to share these narratives of resilience and justice. Please consider leaving a comment below. I am always eager to hear your thoughts. What would you do in my place? How would you reclaim your life after such a devastating betrayal? Your perspectives are invaluable to me. For more stories of courage, the overcoming of adversity, and the quiet triumph of reclaiming one's life and dignity, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. There are many other stories waiting to be told, each one a testament to the enduring power of truth and self-discovery. With heartfelt greetings, and until next time,